In this video, we're going to be talking Marvel Snap, and we're going to be doing some tier list commentary. Specifically, Pool 3, Series 3, where should these cards be, where should they not? And we're going to sort of do a reaction to some what we're seeing, and we're going to create a tier list on stream as well for the entire set. Get to it. We're going to be commentating on Jeff Hooglandia's Series 3 tier list. I'm going to put a link to this video in the description below. There's a few things I want to say is I'm obviously new to the game. People like Jeff have been playing for a long time. So there might be differing sort of situations that we're experiencing at the moment where some end game metas are a little different than what I'm experiencing. But I think it's also fun and important to give someone else's perspective on some of these as well. Now, I'm also going to make my own tier list. One of the things I want to say specifically about Jeff's is I love the rankings he's given these. I think the general idea of powerful and just like he calls it fine but less powerful, and then talking about flexible and a narrow, that's honestly how you sort of have to think about playing this game is, well, this card is a little bit more flexible and can be in all sorts of different types of decks. This one maybe not so much. It's a narrower focus. So I want to give him a shout out on that. So he's got a sort of a upper tier of its own with Arrow. I certainly think that Arrow is one of the top tier cards in the game. I think she's amazing. It's on a critical turn 5. Do I think it's on an echelon of itself? Not so much necessarily, but I did see something where the devs might be thinking about nerfing it, which I was kind of like, you got to be kidding me. It's one of the better cards that I actually did pull. Now I pulled it, so it's kind of like is what it is, but Arrow is at least sort of at that upper echelon tier. So I understand why he sort of puts it in that category. I wouldn't put it in a category of its own. I would put it in for his terms, flexible and powerful, but it is a great card. So the next set we're going to look at is the flexible and powerful. In this one, I agree with Mystique wholeheartedly. Very flexible, very powerful. Brood, that one I struggled with. I didn't think it was flexible necessarily. I actually struggled a little bit if I thought it was powerful. I did think that for 3, it's basically what, a 3/6, and then you know, if you combine it with other non-power type cards, Patriot or Silver Surfer or something, it's pretty good. So I was like, all right, yeah, it's powerful, but I just didn't know if I thought it was necessarily flexible per se, because I thought it really needed to be in certain sets. So to me, that's narrow. So that's one I would have dropped. Dr. Doom, wholeheartedly agree. It's flexible, powerful. Magneto, also agree. Great card. You can manipulate things, can really go anywhere. She-Hulk, same thing. She's powerful. You just got to be... I will say the one thing with She-Hulk is you do have to plan around the power a little bit. So whatever deck you build, you want to make sure that it's going to be strong enough so that at some point you can play her prior to turn 6. At least that's the idea. Sarah, of course, is a great flexible card. Also very powerful, reducing cost. Goose, you know, I hadn't thought of this one before, but I actually agree with that. It is very flexible. For 2 cost, it is very powerful. It's basically a location changer. For 2 costs, I really like that. Not a strong energy card or strong power card, but I think if it was, it would be a problem. Hood, you know, this one I struggled with a little bit. It's either flexible and powerful or flexible and fine. You know, for 1 cost, I mean, basically it's a 1/4, because I mean, unless you destroy the card, which is certainly typically happens with this sort of thing. But again, in that case, you're thinking, well, then, and it's a little bit more narrow. So this one I could go either way with a little bit. It's definitely flexible, or partially flexible. I struggle with the powerful part of it a little bit, but because like I said, it's 2 plays. It's 2 energy for 4 power. Titania, I definitely think it's flexible, powerful. I have not learned to use her very well yet. My understanding is that once you get to learn how to use her, she becomes better. I'm just going to kind of flow with that one a little bit. Polaris, similar to Magneto, I would agree. Very flexible, powerful, you know, not quite half the power, but I think it, you know, it moves a little bit different cards. I like it. Now in the narrow and powerful sets, I like Cerebro, Patriot. Obviously they're sort of like one in the same little bit with buffing other cards. That's the reason that's obviously narrow. I would agree with Lockjaw as well. I think that is a narrow, powerful card. Mr. Negative, same thing. You're trying to build a certain deck around. I'm like, okay, yep, that makes sense. The one I disagree with here on this top row that he's got is Daredevil. I think this is a flexible, powerful card. I think you can put this thing borderline anywhere and it will absolutely make a difference in a ton of decks, and it's a cheap card. I would put this in flexible and powerful personally. Destroyer, I am still sort of personally on the fence on this. It's certainly powerful. Actually, you know, I just don't know. I mean, the actual power level of it is high, but I just don't come across a lot of games where it's like Destroyer impacts it at all. It's actually a lot of times where someone will play a Destroyer and I'll go, I don't understand why they did that, and I won. So for that reason, I think I'm probably going to say narrow and fine on this purpose. Death, definitely powerful. Flexible, not really, because you need discards. You need things to be destroyed. So for that reason, I think I'd agree with it. Wave, I actually think would be flexible and powerful. I would move that one up. I think that Wave does have, she can impact any deck. So if you want to try to, you know, make a more powerful move on turn 4, Wave can help you do it. So for that reason, I would actually move that up. Electro, definitely powerful. Flex, you know, I'm on the fence with flexible and narrow on this one. I would understand why it'd be narrow, because you need certain cards that you want to actually have this feeding. Otherwise, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Same with sort of Psylocke. I think those kind of go hand in hand there, where they're looking to be built around, or they're sort of like accessory pieces to a different deck. So for that, but they're key accessories, so they're powerful. Dracula, this one, I actually think could be more flexible and powerful. The reason I say flexible and powerful is because it's really just about what you've got in your hand after the game's over. But it would be sort of foolish if you left low-level cards in your hand. So for that reason, there is a narrow aspect of it. But as far as the narrow versus flexibility goes, depending on the type of deck build that you've got, I don't think it just needs to be discard. You can have a high-powered deck and have a Dracula come out and play. Like, for instance, if I bring what I call a high-low lockjaw, I would be happy to put Dracula in there. And if all of a sudden I've got a lot of my high cards in my hand and I've played Dracula on a different spot out there, it's like, all right, well, I didn't pull some of those other ones with my lockjaw and my low cards, but they're still in my hand. I've got my Infinite, I've got my Red Skull. You know, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, there's a lot of stuff there. So for that purpose, I think I'd probably pump him to flexible. Red Skull is definitely powerful, you know, but I'm again, another one I'm torn between flexible and narrow. I think that, and I could also, some people say he's fine. Well, you need somebody who can actually, you know, counter the ongoing, so that's giving the other team all that power. All right, so that makes it narrow. So I think I'm gonna agree with him here as far as the narrow and powerful, but I could flex on that a little bit. Taskmaster, I actually disagree with this one. I think this could be flexible and powerful. I mean, yes, you need another card for it, but I think that could be said for, I mean, a lot of things. For instance, Mystique, like you need another card for that, right? So it's like, all right, well, Taskmaster, like what's the difference there between Mystique and Taskmaster? You need another card to play off of. In my mind, Taskmaster is the same. So for that purpose, I would put Taskmaster above in the flexible and powerful. Arnim Zola, now narrow and powerful. I sort of agree with that because you need another card again, but you only need one other card. If I had this, if I was to like rank him in this, I know he's got an energy cost. I would probably have it in a like closest to flexible and powerful loss. And this one for me would be on that top line. It would be right. If it's not inflexible, it would be just underneath it. Quinjet, I absolutely agree with that 100%. It's very powerful and narrow focus. Magic, I was on the fence on this a little bit, but I mean, being able to extend a turn in a game could be a big deal. But in the same sense, like, would you classify a Scarlet Witch or a Storm in that same thing? Because they're both have these similar effects about they could change the turns of the game. So, you know, again, I think that's sort of, you know, maybe narrow and potentially fine as opposed to narrow and powerful. Doc Ock, yeah, I think it's definitely a narrow, it's a powerful card because it can dramatically change one location, but there's a lot of RNG to it. So for that purpose, I would maybe consider a fine, but it's definitely in that realm. All right, so now flexible and fine and narrow and fine. All right, so he's added here the new cards that are about to do the series drop, which I think makes sense. That's probably why you're seeing all these series 3 or general tier list popping off, because everyone's gonna, you know, re-put where the cards are at. I'm thinking about just doing a general tier list because everyone wants to know just what cards. I mean, yes, it matters what series or pool it's in, but same time, you want to know which cards to focus on, right? Agent Coulson, flexible and fine. Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Same thing with Maria Hill. Now, Debris I actually struggled with a little bit here because I think Debris can actually be pretty powerful. She can dramatically change the aspect of a game. For that purpose, I think she's probably flexible and powerful. I just think she fills in way too many spots to be anything other than that. I think Captain Marvel would be flexible and fine, but I've heard and even seen where she doesn't work right, so she won't move necessarily. So I'm kind of like, I don't know. I think that's probably, you know, I don't know. I might want to drop it as somehow below this, maybe a narrow, but I just, the fact that it doesn't work all the time, sort of like, eh. Juggernaut, I definitely like flexible. Fine, the only reason I wouldn't call this powerful is because the RNG of the location where it goes to. Otherwise, I think it's pretty powerful. I use Juggernaut in my one of my main decks, and I love it. I absolutely love it. It can be so controlling. It needs to be paired up with the proper card, like a Storm. But it can be, you can lock down a location with somebody who doesn't have any ability to move. So for that purpose, I get it. I would agree with Rescue. It's flexible and fine. I think the only reason it's not powerful is because you've got to follow it up with another card. Mysterio, I'd agree with. I do see some decks where they play off Mysterio and it is pretty strong. Viper, I think this would be narrow and fine. I don't know if I think that's a flexible. I think you have to have certain things with it. Again, similar to other cards, but it's a narrower focus. So I'd probably put that as a narrow and fine. Flexible and fine for Green Goblin. I would agree. It's not powerful per se, but it's a good hit. It's borderline powerful because you can really alter the status of a location. But Thor, same thing, can get up pretty high. It's definitely flexible. Maximus, it's borderline powerful just because it's a 3/7, but because you're giving your opponent 2 cards, I could see putting it here. Absorbing Man, you know, similar to Mystique here, I'm sort of like, well, you know, we've got flexible and powerful for Mystique. Apparently with Absorbing Man, though, he doesn't do some of the on reveals don't double up. So, and for that reason, maybe it's not powerful. Rogue, definitely flexible. I would argue that Rogue could be powerful. Taking out an ongoing effect is a pretty big deal. For that, it's definitely flexible, but I would argue that it might need to be powerful for that purpose. So I'd consider putting that up. I probably would put it up, honestly. Narrow and fine. Colleen Wing, definitely narrow. Powerful, though, if you've got Swarm, I think that's a pretty big deal. Powerful, so I'm good with this. Gambit, definitely narrow, but I think I'd say narrow and powerful. The ability to wipe off an opponent's card off the face of what they've actually played is a big deal. So I think I'd put narrow and powerful on that for that purpose. Could really swing a game. Narrow and fine for Hellcow, Moon Knight, Black Cat, I agree with. They're fine for that. They're that discard archetype. What I disagree with here is Hela. I absolutely think Hela is narrow and powerful. Like, without a doubt, Hela can change a game. If you are playing that discard deck and you are able to play this card, I'd say 9 out of 10 times you're likely going to win. Now, can it be controlled and countered? Yes, it absolutely can. But it is a powerful card. Like, no doubt about it. Helicarrier, it's definitely narrow, but I might argue this is sort of like in the range of, like, I forget what he called it, the lower tier, but trash, needs rework type thing. Ghost Rider, it's definitely narrow, and I think fine is okay only because of the RNG associated with it. I do love the ability to pull down a big discard, but unless you're discarding a big card, it's not any good. So I do think there's some flexible in him and potential powerful in him. If you pair him up right with like a Sif and say a Helicarrier, Sif, and Ghost Rider, those 3 cards, I mean, that's a pretty nice like trio, right? Just right there. You don't need anything else, just those 3. And then Ghost Rider becomes way more powerful. Helicarrier becomes a much better card. Beast, I agree, narrow and fine. Falcon, definitely narrow. I'm not sure I'd even want to call it fine. Typhoid Mary, I think it's still a decent card. It's probably narrow because you do need to pair it up with something like Zero, so you're not taking other effects. I get that. Zero, you know, I haven't really played with him, so I don't know if I want to give much commentary there, but I understand there's some decks built around him. So for that purpose, I think he'd be maybe a little bit better, or maybe some flexible there. Hazmat and Luke Cage, I actually want to group up a little bit. I think they're definitely flexible. And I'd say flexible and fine for them. I wouldn't say powerful, because I think you need to pair them up a little bit with like a Wong or something like that. But I think when you have that Luke Cage and you have a Hazmat that can do multiple, or even just one, it's nice. It can alter a big part of the game, and that's for 4 energy, you know what I mean? And not just 4 at a time, but it's, you know, you can play it in 2 different turns, or you could drop Luke Cage late and fix everything. I think that's, you know, a nice surprise tactic. Black Widow, he's got it as narrow and fine. There are some things I'd like to explore with her that I think could make her a little bit more flexible. There's some options there. Mojo, I sort of agree with, narrow and fine. Drax, same thing. Crossbones, I think that's fine. Giganto, super narrow, definitely fine because he only plays in one spot. Invisible Woman, I would give a sort of argument that maybe that could go into flexible, but you still need something with it. So I think the narrow part here it's fine. I would agree with Kingpin, narrow and well, I think it's narrow, but I'd say powerful. I'd change Kingpin to narrow and powerful, mainly because he can destroy cards. Now, the immediate counter to that statement and position would be, well, as soon as somebody sees a Kingpin played, they know to fill up that spot. Well, then don't play Kingpin in turn 3, or even probably turn 4. You might want to combine it with a turn 5 with a 3 and a 2. So it's like, okay, and you play it in a spot where you know you can bring in like a Magneto or something like that. So it's like, okay, I'm going to play a Kingpin there, and it's an open spot for different things to swing over. So I think that's narrow and powerful. Spider-Man Morales, it's definitely narrow, but if you're playing with some move types, that can be a pretty strong card for 1 cost. I think, now while I've not played or have Spider-Man, I do think he's flexible. I'd argue that, no, I think it's fine only because it's just 1 turn. But if you play this on like maybe a turn 5 or turn 4 or 5, well, obviously that's the only time you can play it unless you Zabu it. But it can become very powerful in my mind. Rock Slide, I would agree with this, very narrow and fine. It really needs too much. Ultron is definitely narrow, but I might be able to be convinced here that this is powerful. I think that with Ultron, that if you're playing at 6, unless somebody's, you know, you've got priority and someone else is holding a Killmonger, knowing that you're going to play an Ultron, a pretty strong play. So for that reason, I think I'd move Ultron to a narrow and powerful. Wong, I absolutely think this was the one I was a little confused about, because I know there's counters to Wong, but I just think that he's flexible and I think he's powerful. Maybe at the end game meta, it's not quite like that because people are just not doing it, but I think Wong's a really good card. I think it's solid. I think that there's a lot of things that you could be happening and throwing around the field with this, and I think he's a staple to those type of decks. I'm fine with Yellow Jacket, Wasp, that's fine. Lady Jane, or Jane Foster, Lady Thor is a narrow and fine. I would agree with that. Same thing with Adam Warlock. I'd say Adam Warlock's flexible and fine. I mean, who doesn't want to have I think in almost any deck outside of maybe a discard, no, even a discard deck, I'd think maybe, but I want to draw cards in almost every deck I've got. So I think this is a flexible and fine card, but generally speaking, I think these were all pretty solid for my experience. The last ones he had on here, he calls them kind of bad. Leader, it's just crazy how much he's dropped off. It's almost like they overly nerfed him. I kind of agree with it. He doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, and no, nobody's really playing him. Black Bolt, I kind of agree with this. I don't think it's anything crazy. Now, he does mention stature coming, and maybe Black Bolt can impact things more and you get a cheaper stature. I would generally agree with that, and that can make Black Bolt a more desirable card. Agatha is definitely sort of a meme situation. Crystal is terrible. There's some rework ideas that I have for her. I know that they probably thought, oh, she makes sense with Lockjaw, but at turn 4, like, not going to really impact. I disagreed with Deadpool here. While I think he is a narrow, powerful card, yes, he can get destroyed by a Killmonger, but unless somebody's playing it right on turn 6, This is a cheap card that can get built up pretty hard. And if you get any of those locations at the death domain or anything that gets destroyed and you just keep cycling it through, it's pretty big. Venom, I think this is a narrow and maybe fine card. I wouldn't say kind of bad, but a lot of destroyed decks use it and it seems pretty solid. Dagger, move decks playing with them. They're obviously not super strong, but within a, I think she's definitely a narrow, and I'd call her probably a narrow and fine. Human Torch, the only thing with him is obviously he's got to move multiple times. So, you know, he's narrow for sure, but I don't think I'd call him kind of bad. The fact he can double up, if you're able to pair that up with multiple moves with other cards, I think that he can be pretty solid. Ronin, yeah, I'd sort of agree with this. I see him a little bit played out there, but I get that he's not that great at this point. Baron Mordo, I actually disagreed with a little bit here. I hate when I have somebody Baron Mordos me because it takes one of my cards that I might need and automatically makes it 6 power, so it takes it out of my hand. You play that on a double reveal situation. Okay. I might make, when I do my tier list, I might have a troll classification, and this would, to me, would be flexible and troll. Like, this can go with anything, and you're just messing with your opponent. Like, this straight up, like, you want to change the outlook of how your opponents plan on playing their cards? This card. It can change things. Nick Fury, I generally agree with this. I just think that it, you know, the cost of it late at turn 5 doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Omega Red, totally agree with that. I mean, it's not often you're going to be up by 10 points. I mean, maybe with, it's a good card for the location for the Mojo world. Otherwise, and you got to win it. Now, Quake. Now, while I don't play Quake, I don't love Quake, and I don't see people play Quake, I actually slightly disagreed with this. I looked at this because if you play, it's a cheap card, and you could drastically alter the outlook of a game with playing her potentially mid. It's a location changer, and is it really going to do certain things? Oh, maybe. Like, what if you swing, like we just had that, the Space Throne location where you have one card in a spot? What if you swing that? What if you swing the locations of, you know, the power here goes to all other locations, and you do that turn 5 or 6? That's huge. That changes a game. So for in my opinion, I think Quake can, it's maybe narrow, but it's, my mind, it's narrow and probably powerful. So if that was one of the main disagreements I had, but I think, like, look, again, my disclaimer on all this is I don't have as much experience as people like Jeff do, but I want to still give my opinion. And I think that's the point of tier lists, is to talk about them, discuss them, argue, you know, debate, you know, why I think this, I think that. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all subjective. Everybody thinks different things, but the fun part about it is debating. And I think the thing that everybody can get out of it is, you know what? I didn't think about that before. I might try to do that. And if we can all become better and compete more and have more fun in the game, that's really what it's about, right? So again, I don't know Jeff, but I hope he doesn't get upset that I, you know, commented on his tier list. It seems like a chill, decent guy, so I'm assuming he's cool with it. Yeah, that's what my commentary is for this one. I'll definitely make a tier list for myself as well and put that out there at some point in the near future. Hopefully you found this somewhat entertaining, somewhat helpful. If you want to hammer down the like button because of it, or share with your aunt, uncle, nieces, nephews, neighbor, grandma, grandpa, appreciate it. Until next time, hope you have a wonderful day.